Hey, morning, church. How are you? Well, it's a little tepid. You okay? Yeah, boy, we could use some more snow. We've been praying for snow, and apparently last night it snowed, but not here, over in Denver. And so we need to be more specific with our prayers, right? Let's pray this week that God would bring some snow to the Yampa Valley. We could use a little bit more here as we head into a summer. I'm really worried about the dryness of that. So anyway, sorry to be such a bummer on that, but let's pray for snow. So good to see you. Welcome. My name is Troy. I'm one of the pastors here, and glad that you joined us this morning. I'm excited about this little series that we've started a few weeks ago, and I've gotten a lot of feedback, and it's been a lot of fun. And today, this is going to be good. In fact, I'm going to start this out by making a statement, and I think many of you would go, "That's true." Some of you may not. Maybe this church thing is not your gig. You're kind of from the outside. You will definitely agree with this, and that is this. Here's a statement: Religion can be a funny thing sometimes. And when I say funny, I mean like funny ha-ha, funny weird, right? A few years ago, I remember while I was staying at a hotel in Jerusalem, I went over there to do a tour of Israel, and I was staying at a hotel in Jerusalem. I got on an elevator one morning after breakfast to go up to my room. And when I turned around in the elevator to push the number of the floor that I wanted to go to, all of the numbers on the panel were already lit up, And there was only one other person on the elevator, one lady, and I kind of turned to her to look at her and went, with my face, I kind of like, is this a joke? I mean, why would you push all the buttons? It's going to take forever. She kind of ignored my gesture, and the doors closed. And true to form, the elevator went up one floor at a time and stopped on every floor, and the doors would open, and then they close, regardless of anybody getting on or getting off. All the way up. Took several minutes, took forever. Finally get to the 8th floor where my room was, and I stepped off the elevator, and I turned around to look at the lady and kind of looked at her as if to say, ha ha, very funny, grow up. And then I turned and went to my room, and I got my backpack because I was part of a tour, and I left the room and went right back out to the elevator, pushed the button, and waited. And waited for this dumb elevator to come. And finally, after several minutes, the doors opened up, and I got on. And inside the elevator was our tour guide. He was coming down from a floor above me, and I was like, "Hey, good morning." And I turned around to push the button, and all of the buttons were lit up already. And so the doors closed, and the same thing happened. On every floor, we'd go down one floor at a time, doors would open, close, no one would get on or off. And it took several minutes to get all the way down to the lobby. I'm impatient. I don't like that. And when we got out of the elevator, I turned to the tour guide, and I said, "Hey, do you think I should go tell the front desk that the elevator is broken?" And he said, "Oh, Troy, the elevator's not broken. It does that automatically. It stops on every floor automatically." I'm like, why would it do that? And he said, today is the Sabbath. This is the Sabbath in Israel, and Jews are not allowed to do any sort of work on the Sabbath, and that includes pushing a button on an elevator. My mind was blown. I'm like, are you kidding me? I couldn't believe this was real. People live there. And it dawned on me, I realized that every Saturday, in every building in the nation of Israel, everyone skips using the elevator and instead walks up and down innumerable flights of stairs simply to avoid pushing a button. That's what religion. It's a funny thing. It does weird things. It doesn't make sense. And not only that, I would suggest to you that religion can also be hurtful to people. In fact, maybe that's your background. Maybe this is very intense for you to come in to church because churches are really good at doing stupid things. I mean, have you ever been in a situation where the rules, the regulations, the commandments are given priority over compassion? You ever been in that? Like maybe you grew up in church and your parents got divorced and the church leaders kind of really just made it hard on them because of the rules. This happens on occasion. It happens when sacred men, usually it's men, when sacred men in sacred places use their interpretation of sacred texts in such a way to, bully people or withhold compassion from people or mistreat people because of how they view their scriptures. That's when that happens. And I would just wonder, has anybody ever seen that? You ever been a part of that? Or maybe are you guilty of it yourself? I'll be the first to say I am, and I have been. I wasn't raised in church, but when I started going to church, I became very, very religious. In fact, I became what you might call a Pharisee. I got so focused on what the Bible said. And some of the Old Testament texts, I got really deep into that. And that eventually, because of that, I lost sight of who actually wrote the text and why it was actually written in the first place. And so I became very judgmental over people, over what I read versus how people were acting. I got so focused on the speck that I saw in other people's eye that I paid no attention to the log truck that was parked in my own eye. You know what I'm talking about? I just was oblivious to it. And fortunately, at some point, I began to read the Gospels. And I began to see that Jesus had a big problem with people like me. And that I needed to change my ways a little bit. I needed to course correct. And so today, we are in part 3 of a series that we've been doing called Proof. And what we've been doing over the last few weeks is that we've been following John, the gospel writer, as he followed Jesus. One of the things that we've learned is that John didn't follow Jesus because of blind faith. He didn't just kind of, okay, whatever. He followed Jesus because of what he saw and what he heard. That compelled him. And because of what he saw and what he heard, John concluded that Jesus was in fact the long-awaited Messiah of the nation of Israel and of the world. And in his later years, as a very old man, John, after most of his friends and most of his fellow disciples had been martyred for following Jesus, been killed, John was still alive, and he decided, you know what, I should write my story, my account of the things that I saw and heard when I walked with Jesus, and so that others might know. And so we have today this thing called the Gospel of John. Now, you need to understand, this wasn't always in the Bible. He didn't write it for the Bible. He didn't even know that there would be a Bible. He wrote it so that people could know what he saw. And he didn't write it so that we would simply know what happened, by the way. He had an agenda. In John chapter 20, he tells us why he in fact wrote it, his purpose. He says, these things that I've written to you so that you may believe. So that people thousands of years from now who might actually come across my story might actually believe. Believe what? That Jesus is in fact the Messiah, the promised one, the Son of God, and that by believing in him, you may experience a life that's extraordinary. You may have eternal life and a life of joy and a life of peace and a life of hope that you never experienced. And so John is telling us, listen, Jesus was my rabbi. He's my teacher. He's also my friend. But here's the thing. He was also God in a bod. The Word became flesh, is what he said. The God of the universe came down to earth in a form of a man. And I knew and I saw that and I recognized that he is actually the Son of God. I saw him do some things and I heard him say some things that have caused me to believe that. And it changed my life. And I believe it'll change your life too if you'll just kind of hear me out. And so that's what we've got in front of us here. That's what the Gospel of John is. It's an account. And John organizes his account around 7 events. There's many other events are reported, but there's 7 big events that they served as signs. What does a sign do? It points to something that's coming, points to something that is. And these signs pointed to Jesus' true identity. He would say that these things proved that Jesus was who he said he was. These signs convinced him, and he hoped that they would convince us as well. And so we've been looking at this as we're headed to Easter. And so far, we've looked at 2 of the signs that Jesus did. And today, we're going to look at the 3rd. And if you know where we are, on the heading, sometimes in the Bible and in the Scriptures and the Gospels, you'll see a little heading over the chapter. The heading over this chapter is called the healing on the Sabbath. This is what happens, the healing on the Sabbath day. Now, if you're just joining us with this, as you're kind of new with us, let me catch you up on this. Last week, Jesus was up in Cana of Galilee. Israel's kind of a long, narrow nation, and the northern part of it is the Sea of Galilee. And about 25 miles from Galilee to the west was Cana, which was this town where Jesus infamously turned water into wine at a wedding. And so Jesus had left there after that sign, and he went south to Jerusalem to celebrate the Passover, the Jewish Passover, spent a few days there, and then he returns back to Cana last week, where he runs into this wealthy man who is in a desperate situation. This man, as we learned, had traveled many, many miles to find Jesus and to beg Jesus to come and help him. He basically said, listen, Jesus, I don't know you, I've never met you, but I've heard some things about you, and I could sure use your help. Please come with me, come to my house and heal my son before he dies. He had a little boy who was sick and was dying, and this guy was out of cards to play. Jesus responds to that request by telling the man to go back home. Go back home, and you will find your son healed. Now, this was a hard decision for this man because Jesus was his last answer, and he thought for sure Jesus had come with him. And so that man had to make the same decision that we have to make 2,000 years later. That we have the same decision that he had to make. He had to decide, get this, he had to decide whether he could trust Jesus based on what he had heard from others. In that moment, he had to go, okay, I've heard you can do some things. I heard you do it this way. I haven't heard you do it this way, but I got it. I've heard enough to make me think. And so the man left Jesus and ran back home. And when he got there, he found that his son had been healed just as Jesus said he would be. And so today we pick up right where we left off last week in John chapter 5. John tells us this in verse 1. He says, sometime later, after these events, Jesus went up to Jerusalem. If you've read the Bible, you may hear them often say that they went up to Jerusalem. Even though Jesus was in the north and he had to head south to Jerusalem, you would think that he went down to Jerusalem. But no, Jerusalem was on a mountain. And so anytime you had to go up to Jerusalem from any direction. And so it says that he goes down up to Jerusalem. Why? To be at one of the Jewish festivals or holidays there. In verse 2 it says this, now there is in Jerusalem, near the sheep gate. Jerusalem is surrounded by a large wall, and there were different gates that you can get in. There was one called the sheep gate. There was a pool, not a swimming pool, but kind of this just pool of water that kind of was a place that people went to. And he says that pool in Aramaic is called Bethesda, which it is surrounded by 5 colonnades, 5 porches. Now, John is describing this in detail because he's been there. He's seen it. It's a real place that he's describing. But the interesting thing, and you may not know this, is that for centuries, for many, many centuries, no one knew where this pool was. I mean, Jerusalem is still there, but it's been destroyed many times. And so no one knew where it was. They kind of knew where the sheep gate was, but there was no evidence of this pool. But in the late 19th century, they discovered it. Someone discovered it, and they excavated this completely out. In fact, here's a picture. This is the pools of Bethesda. Down below in that deep part was this pool down there where it had these porches there. And they found a 5-sided pool that had a porch on each one of those sides, which verified that it was, in fact, the pool of Bethesda. And John tells us that the most desperate people in all of Israel would gather at that pool. That the people who are in the worst place. In fact, he says this in verse 3. He says, there or here, a great number of disabled people used to lie around. There were blind people there. There were lame people there. There were people who were paralyzed, laying there, the sick. Now, why would they come there? Well, in ancient times, sick people had very few options of what they could do. There wasn't much help. Only rich people had access to doctors, and doctors weren't often of much help. And so the rest of people basically depended on temples and superstitions to heal them, right? They would go to temples where their gods, they would hope that maybe their God would possibly do something for them and heal them. Or there were superstitions, which obviously were a big part of those cultures. In fact, this story that I'm about to tell you today actually hinges on a superstition. The legend goes that that every once in a while, an angel would come and stir up the waters of this pool. And if you were the first one to get into the water, you would be healed. It's like a cool little thing, right? And it's weird, and it's strange, and it makes no sense, but that's how that was. Now, here's the interesting thing. During the excavation of this, they found at the bottom of this pool a natural spring. That there was spring water that came up through some of the cracks in the marble. And what probably happened is that the spring would bubble up every now and then. Water would enter the pool, and when the people would see the surface of the water kind of disrupted or disturbed for no apparent reason, they assumed that an angel did it. Right? That's got attached to this. And as you can imagine, when that happened, chaos would ensue. I mean, the blind, people who can't see would be stumbling, and the crippled people would be fumbling and fighting each other and crawling each other in order to be the first one into the water. And so Jesus walks into this area where healthy people would avoid like the plague, because it was kind of like the plague. I mean, every sick person you can imagine was there. It smelled horrible. Sick people were brought there and left there to just sit all day long. If they had a family member, maybe in the evening that family member would come and pick them up and carry them home. But for most people, they just laid there 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. It just became this place. And I imagine it got bad every once in a while. I imagine maybe a temple official would walk through there and they would find a dead body, because this is the sickest of the sick, and they would cart them out. It just wasn't a very nice and hopeful place. And it's doubtful that anyone ever actually got healed there. And but this day, something different would happen. In verse 5, John tells us what happens. He says, there was a man there who had been an invalid for 38 years. He couldn't move, couldn't walk. For 38 years he'd been sick. And it's possible that he was probably lying at this pool for most of his life. And then Jesus comes to this pool. And this is interesting. Think about it. If you've been with us, you know that a few weeks ago, Jesus turned some ceremonial washing water into wine, right? He took some water that was used for people to wash themselves before they would do some religious activity, and he turned it into wine, right? And then not only that, he offers a few days after that, he offers a Samaritan woman some living water. He called it living water in exchange for the well water that she was drinking. And today, once again, we find someone who is depending on water. Fascinating. Verse 6, it says this, that when Jesus came up and saw this man lying there, and knowing that he had been ill for a long time, Jesus decides, this is a good chance for me to do another sign. This is a good chance for me to show people who I really am and why I've come. And so he leans down and he asks this man a question. And the question he asks him is strange. It's an odd question for him to ask. I'm going to read what he asked in a moment, and then I'm going to ask you the same question. And the reason I'm going to do that is that this isn't the point of the message, but it's such a powerful question, I just don't want to skip over it, because it might actually be why some of you came today. Every week I find people that just kind of come out of desperation to church. They wake up and maybe this is a good question for you to think about. I imagine that when Jesus asked this man this question, he whispered it to him because he wouldn't want to embarrass him and he didn't want everyone to hear. And so John says that Jesus leaned down and he asked this crippled man this question. He said, do you want to get well? What do you think I'm doing here? But he asked him, do you want to get well? And I would ask you maybe the same question, or maybe let yourself ask yourself that. Do you want to get well? And the reason I ask that is not everybody does. I mean, not everybody really does. I mean, some people, you know this, would rather stay stuck in their situation or stuck with their habit instead of actually getting better, right? Why? Well, because sometimes getting better is harder than staying sick. Sometimes getting better is harder than, you get comfortable with your misery. You get comfortable with the dysfunction in your life. And so you choose not to. And it takes effort. I mean, and I'm not just talking about physical ailments, by the way. I'm talking about habits that you have that are messing up your gig. I'm talking about hang-ups that keep nabbing you and messing up things and making your life harder. I'm talking about hurts that you are nursing and you keep going back and you keep picking the scab and thinking about it. It just takes a little effort to get better sometimes. It takes a little humility, a little recognition of, you know what? I'm screwing up. I keep doing this to myself. I keep making these same mistakes over and over. It takes some energy and some motivation to get better. And most of us are like, yeah, I want to get better. Of course I want to get better. But I'd like to stop this thing that I'm doing. I'd like to stop that. I'd like to stop drinking. I drink a little too much sometimes, and it's caused me some trouble, and I'd like to stop. Or I'd really love to stop this drama between me and my wife and having these arguments and these fights. I wish things could get better, but I just don't have the motivation. Apparently, I'm not willing to do anything. I'm just more comfortable with as it is. And I would just rather God come along and wave his wand over me and magically make me better, which, by the way, I think that's what most people think. They come to church and they got this superstition that if you come to church, you seek God, he will magically fix you or transpose you from the mess that you've created and pull you out of it, and that you don't have to do anything. And it's just not true. God doesn't do much unless he can do it with us. He always asks us to do something, and there's some effort in that. And so sometimes staying stuck in a bad situation or bad marriage, whatever, is just easier than getting up and getting help to try to get better. It's human nature. In fact, about a month and a half ago, our church announced that we were offering free marriage counseling to anybody who would like some and to have some, because we just know marriages are under attack and marriage is hard. And it's fascinating. We've had dozens of people reply to that. They go to our website and they click it and say, yeah, send me information. And then we send the information to them where they have the opportunity then to call these counselors and set up an appointment. And you realize, I think four have actually called. And I get it. That's a big step to take, maybe. It's maybe scary, oh gosh, we got to go. And it takes two. It probably takes both people in the couple to go, and so it's scary and it's hard. But it just illustrates that, it takes, some people are just like, you know what, I'm just going to forget about that for a while. I thought about it, but now I'm not. And I get it. Anyway, back to the story. Jesus asked this man, do you want to get well? And then John tells us this man's answer. He says, sir, I have no one to help me into the pool. Whenever the water gets stirred up and I'm trying to crawl in and get over there, someone always gets in ahead of me. Always happens this way. Again, it's just an awful scene. Once the bubbles start rising up, there's this mad rush to the pool. You got people crawling over each other. Apparently, some people would help their friends, and they push them over the pile and throw them, and they would go down into the water. And, and you imagine it wasn't nice little easy steps. It probably was a big drop off. It's possible that some of the people actually drowned. Crippled people, blind people couldn't see. I don't know. My point is, this is just a desperate situation. And in the midst of this horribly sad and hopeless situation, Jesus says these words to this man. In verse 8, he said, get up. Get up. Some Greek translations translate it as rise up. I like that. As in, come alive. Step back into life, right? Rise up, right? And what Jesus then says next is what turns this seemingly random act of kindness into a sign that you and I should study and should try to understand. He says, get up, and in verse 8 he says, I want you to pick up your mat and walk. Very specific. I want you to pick up this mat you've been lying on, and I want you to start walking. John remembers what happens, and he writes it down, what Jesus said, and then he recounts what happens next, and he does it with zero fluff or hype. And this is the Bible. We sometimes read things and we don't stop and think, did he just say what he said? Is that what really happened? Because he doesn't go, wow, right? He just says this. He says, at once, immediately, the man was cured. I saw it. The guy had been sick, been there for years. It was clear he was sick, wasn't walking, wasn't doing anything, and instantly he was cured. And he picked up his mat and he began walking. Saw it with my eyes, I'm telling you. It's an incredible thing. 38 years this man had been sitting there, couldn't walk, couldn't get around, couldn't get to the pool on his own. And all of a sudden he gets up and he starts walking. It's amazing. And in fact, once he started walking, he didn't stop, as you can imagine, right? He's like, I don't think he was like, I think he just like was walking. And he's like, oh my God. And he starts walking and he disappears into the crowd. He's like, try to put yourself there. And so he disappears into the crowd. But here's the thing. You would think that that's the story and that's the end of the story. The story is not over yet. And here's why. Don't miss this. By telling this man to pick up his mat and walk, Jesus had just whacked a hornet's nest with a baseball bat. He just hit this thing, and it's going to be a chaos because the day that Jesus healed this man was on the Sabbath. And that was a no-no. On the Sabbath day in Jerusalem, but more specifically up near the temple, the Pharisees would be walking around, watching people, making sure that no one would dare violate any of the laws concerning the Sabbath. They were controlling that situation. And of course, they then turn around and they see this man walking to the temple carrying his mat. Now, we don't know why this man went to the temple. It's just kind of a natural place. It's near the temple. Perhaps he wanted to give thanks to God. Maybe he just hadn't been there since he was a little boy, and he'd been listening to the music and the sounds and the celebrations just over the wall there. And so he decided, but we're not sure why he went. But the Jewish leaders see him, and the text says this happened. John says that the day on which this took place was the Sabbath. And so, of course, the Jewish leaders objected to this man's healing and his behavior. They are angry about it. And so they come to the man who had been healed and they said, hey, no working on the Sabbath, Buster. Do not work. The law forbids you to carry this sleeping mat. Actually, it didn't. The law didn't forbid him from doing that. Their tradition, their religion did. You might remember when Moses went to Mount Sinai after he led the children out of Egypt. He went up on Mount Sinai and God gave him the 10 Commandments. The law that was written, he wrote the law on these stone tablets, right? That was the written law. And then Moses passed the written law, what God said in the 10 Commandments, down to Joshua before they went into the promised land. And Joshua then passed that on to the judges who ruled the nation for a while. And then the judges passed it on to the prophets. And for hundreds of years, thousands of years, they had the written law. And the written law, as the written law got passed down, the oral law got added to it. The oral law was interesting. It's also known as, maybe you've heard of this, the fence laws. That the fence laws were these hundreds, literally 600 additional laws that were created by the elders in order to protect people from actually breaking one of the 10 Commandments. So they came up with 600 laws that would protect you from even getting near breaking one of the 10. In fact, one example of this is in the oral law, there were 39 categories of things. Not 39 things, 39 categories of things that you could not do on the Sabbath day. One of them was, interestingly enough, you couldn't carry something from one place to another. You were forbidden to carry something from one to another. And in their minds, when they saw this man doing that, he was literally breaking the fourth commandment. You might remember this in Exodus chapter 20, verse 8. God said this, remember the Sabbath day. You're doing that today. Remember the Sabbath day by keeping it holy. When he says keep it holy, he means make it different than the other days. I want you to give it to me. Give it to yourself. Let it be something unique for you. He says this, and how do you do that? He said 6 days you should work and do labor, and you should do all that stuff. But on the seventh, I want you to rest. I want you to chill pill. I want you to let your soul catch up with you a little bit. And the reason God did this is he knows us. we're freaking out about money and are we going to have enough and I better work every day. And he's like, no, if you're one of my kids, I got you. I'm your provider. I'll take care of you. And I would like you to do some soul care. I'd like you to every day take a rest. Be with your family. Get some peace. I'll cover you. I got you. And so he made that promise to him. And the point of that commandment was for people to take a break from their labor, from their working. Not to take a break from loving, or doing good for their neighbors. That had nothing to do with it. It was the work part of it. The commandment was given as an encouragement to people to take a break from their profession, not their compassion. Let's just settle that right here. That's not the point. And yet, this is what they twisted it into. And this is what happens when religious people forget or ignore the why behind the what. It just gets weird. It gets funny and goofy. To be more specific, this is what happens. Let me be very clear. This is what happens when we let our theology or our ideology, or to put it in modern day vernacular, our political party that we believe in, to take precedence over actual people. When we allow those things to be, to allow us to focus on those things over the actual needs and care of people. People that you and I are called to serve and to love and to care for. And if you know Jesus, if you read him in the Gospels, you know he had little patience for that baloney. In fact, Jesus would say this: if you're on the wrong side of love, you're on the wrong side of God. If you're not loving, you're doing it wrong. If you're mistreating people based on your theology, or you're talking trash about political opponents, you're out. You're on the wrong side of this. And you might remember John records a conversation between Jesus and a very religious man by the name of Nicodemus. And Jesus told Nicodemus the greatest truth that human beings had ever heard. He said this in John 3:16. He said, "For God so loves the world." This was earth-shattering. Jews thought that they were loved and everybody else not so much. Jesus said, "For God so loved the world." For God so loved Jews and the Gentiles. For God so loved, we'll put it today, for God so loved the Republicans and the Democrats. Right? That's how many of us think. Right? For God so loved every race and every nation in every generation. Anybody that was made in his image, God loved them, and he sent his son, his only son, to pay for their sins by dying on a cross, so that why? Everyone could be reconnected back to their Creator. Therefore, if that's true, if you've hurt another person, if you've deprived another person of care that they need or of dignity that they deserve by being made in the image of God, that is a sin. That's the sin that we need to watch out for. In other words, if your political, or if our political, or our theological, or even our scriptural application allows you and I to treat someone poorly, we're actually in the wrong. If you've defined the Bible, or if anybody's used the Bible to treat you poorly, they're in the wrong. So, back to our story, verse 10 says that the Pharisees then tells this man, "Hey, it's the Sabbath, dude. It's the Sabbath, and the law forbids you from carrying your mat." But the man replied, he's like, "The man who made me well, the one that actually healed me, you guys have been ignoring me for 38 years. None of you said boo to me. The one who came up to me and healed me, you know what? He said, pick up your mat and walk." And that's what I'm doing. I mean, I'm not trying to violate any laws here. I'm just doing what this guy who healed me told me to do. And so they said in verse 12, they're like, "Okay, well then tell us who this man is that told you to pick this up and walk. I mean, who dares defy the law and defile the Sabbath? Whoever it is, we need to punish that monkey." In verse 13, the man who was healed said, "I have no idea. And I don't see him," because Jesus had kind of disappeared into the crowd. So he's like, it was a dude, I promise you, but I don't see him here. And the conversation kind of ends right there. Now, don't miss this. This is so fun. What happens next might be one of the funniest things to happen in the entire New Testament. There's actually humor in the Bible. You got to pay attention, but this is brilliant. You can go home today and you can read any Bible commentator that you want or commentary on this, on the book of John and on this passage. And I promise you, hardly any of them will give you the interpretation that I'm about to give you of what happens next. Every commentator, every Bible scholar will say that what Jesus does next is complicated. What Jesus says next is kind of difficult to understand. By their own admission, they're like, this is, what he says doesn't make sense. We're not 100% sure what Jesus meant when he said it, all right? But here's the thing. If these guys would just read this passage like a human being instead of a theologian, they'd actually be very clear what Jesus is saying here. In fact, I'll read it to you just as John read it. It's brilliant. It says this in verse 14. It says later on, this man is up in the temple. He's carrying his mat, and Jesus comes up. Jesus finds him at the temple, bumps into him, kind of maybe taps him on the shoulder, and he says this to him. He says, "Look, you are well again." Like, look at you. You're back to your old self, bro. I mean, how is this? Is this cool, right? And the guy's like, yeah, and he's surprised. And he's like, dude, I've been looking for you because everybody's asking me who you are. Who are you? Who are you? Jesus doesn't really answer him, but what Jesus says next is kind of funny. Why? Because Jesus knows that this man has been accused of sinning by the Pharisees. And so Jesus smiles at him. He goes, hey, you better stop sinning or something worse might happen to you. I think Jesus is being sarcastic. I really do this. I think he's saying, hey, stop sinning. You better stop carrying that little mat around, you wicked, evil boy, you, or something bad's going to happen to you. And he laughs. I think he's smiling about it, I promise, because it's crazy. Why? Because this man hasn't sinned in 38 years. He's been doing nothing for 38 years. He's been just trying to survive for 38 years. Every day for 38 years, he's been sitting by a pool waiting for magic bubbles to come up and heal him. And then on the very day that Jesus comes by and heals him of a 4-decade-old nightmare that he's been living, the religious leaders show up and they have the audacity to accuse him of sinning simply because he's walking around carrying his mat. It's crazy. It's no mystery to me what Jesus is doing. He is poking fun. He is making fun of the ridiculousness of religion and of religious people, which we all kind of do. We see them do weird, funny things, and we're like, this is stupid. And he's doing the same thing. He's like, you better stop sinning, bro, or you're going to get punished. You might get kicked out of the temple. And I believe the guy probably went along with it and laughed. Yeah, woo, scary. I haven't been to the temple in 38 years. Bring it on. I mean, what's the big deal? I mean, seriously. How do you punish a man who has been lying hopeless on his back for 38 years and now he can suddenly walk again? How do you bring punishment? This is a joke. And Jesus is calling it out. This is funny. And here's the punchline for us. This is the take home for us, especially for those of us who grew up in a religious home that was very legalistic, where we had a rules-based faith. It's all about following the rules. Here's my statement. When you recognize, put this up, when you recognize who Jesus is, you will lose your fear of religion and of religious people. When you realize who Jesus really was, when you read the Gospels and you see who he was, you will lose your fear of what religious people think of you, and you'll lose your fear of religion, right? I mean, some of you grew up in this thing and you're so bound up by guilt and fear, you just walk around with this black cloud because you've been a bad monkey. That's all you've been told. You're bad and you're worried, and maybe that's why you stay away from church, and then you come to church and you're like, oh, I'm sure I'm going to get struck by lightning today. Walls are going to fall in, because that's the thing you grew up in. And I'm telling you, listen to me, when you truly discover who Jesus is and you decide to actually follow him, religion will lose its hold on your life. It'll lose its grip on you. And you'll just be free of that. You'll just be like, that's a bunch of hoo-ha. It's superstition doing those things. Watch how this ends. Verse 15, it says this man went up, right up to the Jewish leaders, and he told them it was Jesus that had healed him. This man who's in rags walks right up to the religious leaders, the Pharisees, who have their big giant hats and their robes and their tassels, and they're walking around, very intimidating. He walks up to them and goes, hey, guys, it's me. You guys were asking me earlier. I bet he's got his mat just right in front of him on his shoulder. And he's like, you guys were asking about the guy that healed me? Yeah, his name is Jesus. You should go talk to him. Really, go talk to him. Ta-ta. And they know it. They're infuriated by this. The audacity of this blows them up. Verse 16, John says this, because Jesus was doing these things. What was he doing? He was healing people on the Sabbath. The Jewish leaders began to attack Jesus. They went and found him, and they attacked him, and they accused him of breaking the law. And in verse 17, it says this, in his defense, Jesus said to them, something interesting. He says, my Father, he's always working, and so am I. It's a brilliant thought. In other words, he's saying God doesn't take a day off. God is always, every day, helping people and serving people and answering prayers. He's always doing that. And by your dumb definition here, you're actually saying that God is violating his Sabbath. And so here's the thing. I will too. Because like Father, like Son. And that took them to another level. Verse 18 says this, for this reason, they tried to all the more to kill him. And this is what religion does. You mess with their little rules and regulations, they will go to another level that doesn't make sense. I mean, doesn't the 10 Commandments say, thou shalt not murder? And here they're like, we got to kill him because of the Sabbath thing. And it says this, it says that they tried to kill him. Not only was he breaking the Sabbath, but he was doing something else. He was calling God his Father. He was kind of making himself equal with God. And verse 19, Jesus understands that, and he says to them this. He says, very truly, I tell you, the Son does nothing by himself. He can only do what he sees the Father doing. I'm only doing what he tells me. And so whatever the Father does, the Son also does. We're the same. If you've seen me, you've seen the Father. Jesus is saying, you guys want to know what God is really like? Look at me. You guys want to know what God would actually say? Listen to what I'm telling you. Want to know what God would actually do in a situation? Follow me and you'll see. I and the Father are one. And this is crazy. He's locking this down. And then Jesus concludes this conversation with the religious leaders with this one thought. And I'll end this too, and then we'll pray. In John chapter 5, verse 39, Jesus says this to the religious leaders, and you and I would do well to pay attention to this as well. He says this. He says, you guys study the scriptures diligently, which is good. That's good. And you think that by doing that, you will find eternal life. But listen, what you're missing is that these scriptures are pointing to me. This whole thing. I remember being on the outside looking in. I thought the Bible was just a bunch of religious rules and regulations. What I found when I've actually read it is that it's a story about Jesus from the beginning to the end. If you don't know that, you need to get into this. It'll blow your mind. He's like, these things are pointing to me, and yet you refuse to come to me to get this life that I come to bring to you. He's like, listen, man, there was a time you guys had an excuse for your ignorance because I get it. You're trying to figure out what God's saying. But here's the thing. The Word has become flesh. I'm standing right in front of you. This is it. And all this guessing and wondering and confusion that you have, that's over, right? I am the sign. I am the one that you have been looking for. And you're not going to find me if you keep playing these religious games of cat and mouse and who's in and who's out and who's doing this. The way you'll find this life is by following me, looking at me, hearing me. you'll find that life. And so I think Jesus would conclude by saying, listen, if your religion, if your faith, whatever it is, allows you to dismiss people, to just cut people out, or to treat people poorly, that's the wrong version. That's not it. Remember, when you're on the wrong side of love, you're on the wrong side of God. And Jesus would say, hey, drop that, and come on, just follow me. Some of you have bailed out on your faith because of religion. Man, I encourage you, check Jesus out. Give him a second shot. Jesus, let him show himself to you and show you perhaps the God of the universe that you've always been dreaming of, hoping. When you see it, you're like, that makes sense. That is a kind of faith that I want. Amen? Jesus is genius. Let me pray. We'll go. Hey, Lord, again, I just know there are folks that have gotten hooked because of religion and religious people, and we have misrepresented you for centuries. And I'm just convinced that the Jesus of the Gospels has always been there, and we've just missed it. And thank you for that. Thank you for clarifying and what's most important. And in him, we do see life. We don't see regulations and rules that have no meaning. We see life. We see love. The Sabbath was given as a gift to mankind, and religion turned it into a burden. And Jesus came and said, no. It's about life. And why wouldn't I help this poor man? And why wouldn't I help anyone that's in this room right now that's looking for help and is unable to move? God, thank you for Jesus. I hope you would help us to pursue him and to put him first and to seek him and to trust him and to trust his words and to follow him and his example as we kind of try to help this world find him that they've lost because of what religion has done. Lord, help us to do that, I pray in Jesus' name. Amen.